Hello again. This video is going to accompany Lesson 2, and you can find that PowerPoint on Blackboard, just like Lesson 1. So we're going to be talking about social settings and developing relationships, which is a really important part of working, especially with young children, and using communication to do that. So if you look along in your PowerPoint, you'll see some objectives for Lesson 2. I want you to look at those and be familiar with them, and then use the student task list again as a list for you to keep up with the assignments as they come. So two important things, remember, for each lesson are the practice and the demonstrate, because this is like a skills-based class. So we're going to be talking about communication skills, skills of building relationships, and those are going to be things that you're able to learn and practice and then show me that you can do them. Okay? So in this case, there's listed a couple of ways we're going to do that for this lesson. So in social settings, we're going to be talking about three main social settings for children. That is the home, school, and community. Now think back again to Lesson 1 in Bronfenbrenner's ecological system idea. So we have the immediate environment of the child, which is the home, and then broadening out to the next level or layer is something like the extended home. You can think of a school as a little like that, because the children spend so much time there. And then continuing out to the broader picture is something like the community. And this is some information taken from the Family, Schools, and Communities book in Chapter 1. So at home, these are the early years, of course. Now, daycare often starts somewhat early for some families, but primarily the home is where life starts. And attachment is a really important part of how children and adults develop relationships. And it's through those relationships, those attachment relationships, that children actually develop themselves. They develop their brains very directly, and they develop patterns or strategies of developing future relationships. They use those early attachment experiences to understand themselves and to understand themselves in relation to others. And that is extremely important. It arguably makes us who we are as our development of relationships with each other. Now, trust is really important. That's a key part of what's called secure attachment. We're going to be coming back to attachment in a later lesson and dive into it in more detail to understand what it is to have secure attachment. What is it that parents do to cultivate a secure attachment with children, and what do children show us when they are securely attached through their behaviors and their apparent thoughts and feelings? Okay, exploration is a really important part of early home life. So there's the parents or caregivers serve as a little bit like a buffer to the outside world, but while protecting them from so many of the things that can go wrong in the world, there's also a really important need for pressing the child gently but encouragingly to explore lots of the world. Okay, and you see this in children. They want to explore. They're exploration machines. So if you give a child anything, they grasp onto it. A young child, they put it directly in their mouth. And their mouth, the child's mouth is like their first exploratory mechanism, because the mouth is so sensitive. They can tell a lot by putting something in their mouths. That's why they do it, to figure out what it is, to explore. Allowing the child to explore broadly like that, but safely and within confines of age-appropriate settings, is super important. Now, epigenetics. You've heard, I'm sure, of genetics. Epigenetics means something like an added element to how genetics formulate themselves. So we all have a certain given biology. We inherit genes from our parents. Now, epigenetics is something like how the environment impacts not the genes themselves, but the expression of those genes. So your genes can actually express themselves in different ways, and they do, given different environmental settings. It has a lot to do with like attachment and trust. It also has to do a lot with chronic stress, disease, poverty. Those things play a part in how your genes express themselves, and therefore who you become. Okay, so very, very important idea. Now, school, that's like the next layer out. We can think of it as the mesosystem, okay, in Bronfenbrenner's model. And so we're moving from the microsystem, the individual and family, to the mesosystem. Meso means medium or middle. And so this is a time in which the sense of self begins to really fully develop itself in autonomy. And autonomy, it means something like an ability to be on one's own to a degree. Now, as children enter school, they're thrust into a new environment within which they are an individual entity, kind of facing this new environment or this new landscape. And so how the home life went and how they were able to trust attachment figures then really plays an influential role in how they feel about their sense of self, their sense of autonomy as they enter school age. Moving out layers into the community, the child's experience really depends on how the family views those and uses those community resources. If the family shuts down opportunities, then the child's going to follow suit and do that as well. If the family is engaged in the community and utilizes things appropriately, then the child's going to see that and develop those habits him or herself. Transculturalism is a really important idea. Trans means between, okay? And culturalism, obviously, has to do with our ethnic background or our cultural background. Now, the child, when balancing him or herself with the community, is exposed to different cultural values and customs, traditions and views, and just ways of living. And themselves, or they are kind of comparing themselves all throughout this process. What are they like and what am I like? And this is a really important part of discovering what it is to be a person, and blending yourself as an individual with a varied group, with a broad community. Now, social capital could be thought of as like the value of social interaction and where you stand in those social interactions. Society and interaction between people is really arguably one of the most important things to us. That's why we're calling it capital. It's more valuable than money in so many ways, because that's what we live on in communities and societies. Okay, so for your practice portion of this lesson, I want you to think back about these three social settings, and remember that interaction is just the most important part of all three of them. And I want you, in a discussion post, to share some of your findings as you research a little bit about the important idea of attachment, okay? Think about how attachment can relate to what we've just discussed, and then give some more information about what attachment is. Look specifically for some things like how secure attachment develops and how it impacts ways that a child can feel a sense of self or autonomy throughout their development. Make sure to share your source information, okay? So show me where you got the information on your discussion post. And I also want you to reply to at least one other student's discussion, okay? Just simply reflecting on something interesting they said, follow up with a question, make sure that you're using appropriate discussion etiquette as we have discussed. Use these as guiding questions, okay? So I do want you to use these ideas. Brain-environment interaction, okay? So this has to do directly with attachment, how the brain and the environment interact and how they mutually influence one another. What the main categories of attachment are, that's something I want you to really figure out, okay? There's only 4 that I want you to really concentrate on. Some models say 3, but I want you to find those 4, okay? Look for the name Dan Siegel. Okay, he's a really good resource, Dan Siegel. If you look him up, you'll find some good information. Also, define or describe some of your ideas about the balance of dependence of caregivers. That's how much a child kind of needs their parents and caregivers versus how they find themselves to be independent. Okay, what's that like in a child's development, and how do you know that it's going okay? All right, so in the Teacher's Guide text in Chapter 1, we're talking about relationships with children, how to build those things. So showing interest in each student, obviously, that means presence and engaged, like those active listening skills, showing them that you're interested in them. right? Individual contact, before the school year really shows the child that you're invested in them. And this is, of course, in the context of schools, but it broadens out to anything. Making personal connection, getting to know them personally, to know what kinds of interests they have, what they like, what their background is a little bit, and find times to do that in your interaction where you're not busy doing something else, like in school, lunchtime, recess, or something. Showing care for special populations. Now, I put that there like that basically means something, a population other than the one you're used to. Okay, that could be considered special population. So, any variation of cultural or linguistic diversity, any disabilities that you're not familiar with, any gifted and talented types of situations. These are, the more you know, the more interest you can show. Okay, so try to broaden that out as much as possible. Now, relationships with families. Now, we were just talking about relationships with students or children or clients. They were children if you become a therapist, for instance. But the families, they're the holding containers for those children. So understanding the family demographics, okay, what their cultural, ethnic, economic backgrounds are. Exploring and understanding as much as you can the diversity you see in them based on your own experience, and that's really important. Understanding where you come from so that you know what you can learn from others or about others. Again, disabilities or gifted and talented, that's anything that you might not be so sure about. And even if you think you are, they're experiencing it in a totally different way because they're themselves and you're who you are. Understanding strengths, understanding concerns. Now, concerns is a good way to bend or reframe something like weaknesses. Okay, so concerns would be something that you might feel when working with a family that they can turn into a strength, rather than it being something they're bad at or something that's weak. But understanding those is the first step to either cultivating them more as in strengths or helping them change maybe something that they're doing to lead to a strength. Alright, so in the demonstrate portion of this lesson, I want you to submit as an assignment on Blackboard some answers to these questions, okay, as I've put there in the first bullet point. Then I want you to develop what I'm considering like a back pocket list. This is basically like small talk questions or relationship developing questions or comments, thinking back to with active listening from lesson 1 that you can use to start or continue conversations with children. As you find yourself developing that list, I want you to try to use some of them during your week. It doesn't have to be with children. Just sprinkle some into some conversations to show yourself that you can use them with fluidity and ease. Okay, some things might be something like asking about specific interests. If you notice someone carrying a book, ask what kind of book it is. Do they like that genre? What's it like? Maybe asking them a little bit more about their background too, like where'd you grow up, where'd you come from, that kind of thing. If you speak with someone who speaks a different language, try to ask a little bit more about that and try to gain some insight about how their lives have been up to this point. Write a reflection about that experience too. So as you try these things in real life situations, I want you to think about how it was. Was it difficult? Was it awkward? Were you trying to squeeze something in that didn't feel right? Or did it broaden your understanding of this person? And I want you to write that reflection as a discussion post. Include your list too of those back pocket things that you used. As always, remember your QQC, your question, quote, and comment from the reading from this week. They'll want you to also submit as a discussion post. And then consider these things of self-reflection as a self-reflective journal entry that I want you to submit on Blackboard as well. Thinking about these 3 social settings and your own development and your own environment as you grew up. And then specifically thinking about your experience with teachers and caring adults in your life as well. Okay, so use these as guiding questions as you follow through with this journal entry for self-reflection. Remember to use your student task list at the top of this PowerPoint presentation, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.